Hello everyone. This is indeed a pleasure to see so many after the empty one this morning. Anyway, we're very pleased to have today the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Mr. Tomás Ojea Quintana, and he will be presenting his report to the Third Committee this afternoon. So we'd like to hear from you, Special Rapporteur, and then we'll have questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this session. It's very important to address the media at this juncture in regards to the situation in the North Korean Peninsula. I am here in New York to address the General Assembly, the Third Committee. I will present my report to them, my human rights report, the situation of human rights in DPR Korea. It's going to be in the afternoon, but I'm here to share with you some of my views and part of my assessment of the human rights situation. First, let me. I will make a few points, and then I will open the floor for your questions. First point that I wanted to make. In my report, and I repeat it here, I strongly support the rapprochement between the North and the South Korea. I think that's an extraordinary development. Both parties are investing a lot of efforts and commitments in this rapprochement. It's historical, and it's moving very fast. Very fast, and I welcome this understanding, this process of understanding towards peace and prosperity in the Korean Peninsula between the North and the South. I also see that it is very important, the summit between the leader of the DPR Korea and the US leader. Those summits and this rapprochement has brought a lot of interest in the international community and has eased the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, which last year, when I was addressing the General Assembly in November, was really heightened tensions, compromising the security in the North Korean Peninsula and beyond. Therefore, these developments from the geopolitical perspective and from the security perspective, and for the prospects of peace and prosperity are very important, and I need to emphasize that. Now, having said that, I have been very clear that I'm very concerned that neither in the Panmunjom declaration, neither in the Singapore statement, we have seen any human rights reference, language, terminology, concern, interest. It's out of those agreements. We don't know even if the human rights issues were discussed during those meetings. We are ignorant about what's the stance of these parties in regards to the human rights issues. And this is something that needs to be raised here, especially in New York, where the General Assembly sits and the Security Council sits. And I am committed as the UN mandate holder appointed by the Human Rights Council to raise my voice, to offer my assistance to the parties in regards to how to address the human rights situation in North Korea. Bearing in mind that not so long ago, and we can go back to 2014, 2015, where the well-known Commission of Inquiry issued its report with very serious findings about systematic, widespread human rights abuses in North Korea, even referring to the possibility of crimes against humanity being committed in the country. Now the situation has changed, and it is my obligation to remind the parties that that was the situation, that the human rights situation at the moment has not changed on the ground in North Korea, despite this important progress on security, peace, and prosperity. But the situation on the ground, according to the information that I have been collecting throughout this year, shows that there is no any substantial change. Therefore, this is my call to the parties here in New York, and I have a specific call to the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Together to their important initiatives of engaging with the South Korean government and the US government and some others, it is the time for North Korea to show commitment to the human rights agenda, some way or another. We have seen nothing from North Korea in this respect, and the most important challenge, who has been there for many, many years, is the possibility to gain access to North Korea, to go to the capital city, to talk to the leaders, to talk to the authorities, to talk to the different agencies. That's very important. It is very important for North Korea to end isolation. It's important that North Korea starts in the right step in regards to the human rights agenda. And I'm ready. I've been reaching out the authorities many, many times, but unfortunately they reject the mandate and they do not even accept having a conversation here in New York or in Geneva. But there are many, still the government has this challenge of open up to the human rights agenda. Of course, it might be also in a process, but this is the timing for them to show commitment to international human rights values and principles as a respectful member of the United Nations. These are the main political lines that I can share with you. I brought with me a lock that was given to me when I met a boy who was escaping North Korea for different reasons. But he gave me this lock and he said, I won't give you this to you, to the United Nations, because we believe that you have the key to open this lock. So somehow this lock represents the challenge of North Korea to open up, to start relating to the people who are working the human rights agenda. And in my report, I also suggest that the newly appointed High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Bachelet, initiates a process of engagement with the DPR Korea, that the DPR Korea also reach out to her office. So we start working on the human rights agenda. That will be my main message. So I will leave it there, and there are many issues that are included in my report. In my report, there are some substantive issues that I have been evaluating. Some of these issues have to do with the economic, social, and cultural rights, some others with civil and political rights. But I will stop here and then open up for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anka, thank you. This is the UN Correspondents Association.
Hello. My name is Shauna McGee from Kyoto News, and on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you very much for having this. We really love this opportunity to be able to ask you questions. It's clear that you said the human rights situation has not improved despite the political improvements. Can you give us some examples, some concrete examples? And in your report, you mentioned how the TB situation has gotten worse. Can you walk through some of those concrete examples for us? And if I may, I would like to ask a second question regarding a mention in your report that you would support a declaration to end the Korean War. Have you had conversations with anybody about that, and do you anticipate that could happen in the near future? Thank you.
All right. In regards to the first question, let me respond it by giving you some context. And the context is that, I just said it, I have no access to the country. It's very difficult to comprehensively assess the human rights situation. I mainly based my conclusions on the testimonies from those who leave the country. And I try to understand the reasons that made them leave, and there are many different reasons. But there is a pattern lately, which is, especially in the countryside, in the provinces, the pattern of people being left on their own by the system itself, the North Korean political system, where people should provide for their food, the people should provide for their health, etc., and etc. In my report, there is a transcript of a testimony which says, if you can't pay, you will be turned away. And these are the kind of patterns of human rights, especially economic, social, cultural rights, limitations for the people in North Korea. And it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that these people enjoy these kind of rights. So this is an area that I'm still looking into. What is the situation in the countryside? Because other testimonies, especially from colleagues of you who have been in Pyongyang, especially in the context of the conversations, where you can see in Pyongyang a boom of the construction, a lot of new goods and items where you can buy. Now, from my assessment, comparing to the countryside, the situation is quite different, and it is one of the main reasons that made people leave the country. The other areas that I have been addressing is the situation of persons in detention. Again, the lack of access, the lack of knowledge about the procedures in the prisons. It turns very difficult for me to address the issue through different angles, including the legal angle, etc., etc. How is the functioning of the judiciary in North Korea? At some point, we will need to start discussing that, and not only the human rights advocates, but those, if there is an opening for investment or businesses, we will have to look into the judiciary system. What are the guarantees in this respect? The rule of law, etc., etc. But the testimonies also tell about the ill treatment in prisons, like a pattern of how to interrogate people, how to get information from people. The practices seem to be using, ill treatment to that end. So that's another human rights issue, and there are others. But let me then respond to your question in regards to the declaration of peace. This is an issue that I have been asking my the delegations who I met here in New York. I also visited Seoul. I've been in Stockholm. I've been in Brussels, trying to reach the European Union, trying to reach out those who have embassies in Pyongyang. What is the role of Sweden? You should know that Sweden plays the role of counseling for those foreign prisoners in Pyongyang. So I've been asking this question about what is the prospect of declaration of peace. So at some point there were some countries that have that intention, and of course I I will support a declaration of peace, definitely. I believe that there is an interlinked relationship between peace and human rights, and I would say yes to peace. But peace needs to be built also on the enjoyment of basic freedoms and rights, and that's the way I am putting it. Yes.
James Bays from Al Jazeera. Firstly, you seem to be suggesting that human rights have been somewhat left behind by all this recent summitry. So what is your message to President Trump particularly, because he's planning another summit with Chairman Kim? What should he raise at that summit? And a related question, if I may, when you see these pictures of the North Korean leader at these summits, you welcome this rapprochement between North Korea and the rest of the world, but it's also a rehabilitation of a leader who has been accused of appalling crimes, including murdering his own relatives, murdering his own brother, according to the Kirby report, crimes against humanity. How do you reconcile this rapprochement and this rehabilitation of Chairman Kim with the need for accountability?
All right. I will not deliver an advice to a president, but in response to your first question, the United States has played an important role in putting the human rights agenda in North Korea on top, supporting initiatives, supporting the Commission of Inquiry. So I have always been very clear with this message. North Korea has argued that human rights has been used for political purposes. So the challenge and the risk at this point is that, in fact, if we sideline human rights, then that will reconfirm that human rights was used for political purposes, which is not the case of the Human Rights Council and at least of my mandate. So the United States and President Trump in the summit, there were some confusing statements in regard to whether or not human rights were addressed. Apparently, there was a reference connected to the issue of the return of remains of U.S. prisoners or the release of U.S. prisoners in Pyongyang. That has to do with human rights, definitely has to do with human rights. But we need to talk about the human rights of the people living in the Dprk, the ordinary citizens living in North Korea. My job is to report about the situation on the ground in Dprk. So that's why and I came here to New York to be very strong about this message. And you may know that I have been the Myanmar rapporteur in the past for 6 years. And my experience with Myanmar tells a lot about a situation where the international community decides to put aside human rights. I was a rapporteur during the transition towards democracy, and I raised back in 2012 my concern about crimes against humanity being committed by the military in Myanmar. And I even called for a commission of inquiry, and the international community couldn't reach a decision in this respect. They were endorsing the transition, putting aside human rights. And now, somehow, we see the consequences. Those who sound the alarms are not being heard. So now, I'm here trying to bring this message. It might be inconvenient. When I was a Myanmar rapporteur, I remember a member of an ambassador told me that I was being toxic by talking about human rights in Myanmar in the context of the transition. I'm not saying the situations are completely the same, but at some point, we shouldn't undermine what we have been doing here at the United Nations. We should undermine the principles of human rights, because sooner or later, it will come back. So this is my first message. And the second...
It's about accountability, particularly Chairman Kim.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far to say that those summits somehow are a rehabilitation of the leadership of North Korea. The point that I want to make is that this important development that I support, there is a need for the civil society and the individuals and the ordinary people to get involved. We shouldn't be just relying on what the leaders are doing, shaking hands and reaching agreements, because we need to get the people involved, because the people, the civil society organizations have a lot to say about this process. And ultimately, the peace will impact on their lives. So there is a need for them, for the leaders, to hear the voices of these people. And just a quick last point. The accountability agenda continues at the OECHR office. The High Commissioner's office has appointed a number of experts who are evaluating the evidence and looking into, future processes. So this is still going on while this process of rapprochement and peace talks are taking place.
Thank you. Just a minute after.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-ups. Why do you think that there was no mention of human rights at either of the major summits? And in looking at the situation today, and you said that you didn't think it had changed, could you tell us what you think that the government is still doing in terms of committing human rights abuses, and what you would like to see the United States, the South Koreans press specifically for the government to do to show that they are making some kind of a commitment to human rights?
Thank you. The nuclear problem in the Korean Peninsula is extremely serious for all parties involved and for humanity as a whole. What is happening in regards to why human rights are being put aside has to do with this very serious and challenging issue of addressing the nuclear problem in North Korea especially. So I'm not saying that responds to your question on why is this being put aside, but I am a reporter, I look to reality, and this is part of the reality. It has been very difficult to engage and to have a dialogue and understanding and to build trust, confidence to North Korea in all areas. And it is clear that since the parties involved found a space here, windows and opportunities, they are going for that. And I understand. I should say that I do understand why is it that the human rights discourse has been downloaded a little bit or downloaded from these talks. I understand. By understanding the reasons, then I can bring proposals. And the proposals for them, for the parties, and responding to your second question is what I think it's needed now from North Korea, and in the context of the conversation, peace talks, etc. It's a signal from North Korea that they will discuss human rights at some point. I put it at the beginning by saying that North Korea needs to show that they will end isolation in regards to this question. They will start engaging, and we haven't heard anything. We haven't seen anything coming from the summits, from the statements in this respect. I would like to see a signal to start working based on that commitment. So I'm not saying that right now it's the time to open up completely the country, to start looking into all the issues, etc. That's unrealistic. But as the process of rapprochement and talks are moving so fast, we, the human rights people, we also need to move fast and bring proposals, different proposals, how to do it. Because it's not just because of intentionally they are keeping aside the human rights agenda. It is the political dynamics that's taking place. Very difficult, complex. So we need to be ready, raise our voice, bring proposals. The proposal to engage with Mrs. Bachelet is one. And there might be some others. And you asked me about the...
I also asked you for some specifics about the situation of what's happening on the ground. I mean, are the detention centers still as full? Are there still allegations of torture and whatever?
I responded to that question before, but let me be more specific. Every time that I met those who escaped North Korea, I asked them about their knowledge about the existence of political prison camps and what do they know. Because what we know is that they exist, they are far away, they are kept in hiding, and we don't know much about it, other than what the COI report has found out. And these testimonies continue to reflect that they exist and that people who somehow or some way or another show disagreement or discontent with members of the system, political system, they might be sent to those places and never heard anything about them. So that's a very serious issue. The existence and the situation of political prison camps.
Do you still want to follow?
Yeah, thank you. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. You've said you understand why human rights may not be top of the headlines from these summits that have been held so far, but do you have a concern that the United States is no longer prioritizing, like it used to, human rights in North Korea?
In my meeting with the U.S. representative, the UN mission to the United Nations, they were very clear that human rights continues to be a priority of the United States, that they will push for a resolution at the Third Committee on North Korea human rights situation, and they encouraged me to continue with my work. So that's something concrete that I can tell you about it. And let me add something that has to do with how to introduce a human rights perspective into this the complexity of the negotiations. It is not easy, and I recognize that when you sit down with your counterpart, because as long as you maybe raise any of these issues, the meeting is over, for example. So I understand the complexities of this process. But in Geneva last March, in part of my proposals to DPRK was start releasing prisoners, political prisoners, as also a signal that you are committed to the United Nations system, values, etc. And later on, after that, we saw in the media that there was an amnesty passed by the leadership where some prisoners were released. That was a very important news. But no one was really looking into that issue. Why is it that happened? Who were those prisoners? Whether were women, men, children, what they were accused of, etc. We need to try. This is kind of an example of how difficult it is to access to information, even in the best situations. That's why I am calling for an opening up. To even discuss these issues. I welcome that release of prisoners, but I don't know anything else about it. I sent a letter to the delegation in Geneva, and I asked them, I welcome the decision, but please share with me your information about these prisoners. There was no response. So these are the kind of issues that has to do with human rights, and we can work together.
Yes, behind.
Thank you. Fumitaka Sato from NHK. My question is about abduction issue. So meantime, have you reached out to any direct or indirect information about abduction issue in the DPRK? And one more question is about the deportation, which you mentioned several times. You mentioned the plan to contact with the Chinese government. Have you any development on this matter? Thank you.
On the abductions issue, I have not seen any progress. Unfortunately for their families, who are getting old, many of them don't know where their relatives are, whether they are dead or not. They are under the legal situation of enforced disappearance. But I haven't seen any progress in this respect. I know that the Japanese government is putting all their effort towards addressing the issue, even trying to engage with the North Korean government. I welcome all initiatives in this respect because the priority is to seek the truth about what happened with these people. In regards to the situation of those people who leave North Korea, who escape in some cases, the usual journey goes from crossing China, going all over from China to some third country like maybe Thailand or Laos, and then going to South Korea. It's a long journey for these people, very long, with a lot of risks, especially women being subject to trafficking, sexual exploitation as well. And some of these people who cross the border with China remain in China. And they make their lives there. Women marrying Chinese husbands, having children. But some wants to reach South Korea. And they have been, as you mentioned, there are cases where these North Korean escaping or leaving the north through China are being arrested in China, and some of them facing the risk of repatriation. So there is a discussion at the moment with the Chinese government about their status, whether or not these people can be considered as refugees, surplus. The Chinese government has said that, according to their assessment, these are illegal migrants. So I'm in the process of trying to have a discussion with the Chinese authorities in this respect. In my opinion, it has been proven that if these people are repatriated to North Korea, they are subject to ill treatment, at least ill treatment. Only that fact makes the Chinese government comply to the principle of non-refoulement. You cannot refoul someone who is going to be ill-treated because he or she left. So this is the situation. We are in a process of having a conversation with China. China has been responding to my written requests, and in some cases they have released these people without repatriating them, which is a good news. So this is still an ongoing process.
Further questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Motokura of Kyodo News Japan. My question is about humanitarian impact of Security Council sanction on humanitarian situation in DPRK. And we have a tougher sanction compared with 1 year ago. And on the other hand, there has been a new mechanism to avoid a humanitarian impact in DPRK Sanction Committee to ease humanitarian aid. And these new elements have changed something in the situation on the ground. Thank you.
Last year, when I addressed the third committee, I raised my concern about the issue of humanitarian aid and sanctions restrictions. I welcomed after that the Security Council's committee issued these guidelines to enhance the process of authorizing humanitarian aid. So that's very important. The question is to what extent these guidelines are being implemented and allowing humanitarian aid to get into the country. The UN humanitarian agencies working on the ground argue that they are still facing some restrictions in this respect or some problems in the authorization of this humanitarian aid. Now, at the moment, the discussions in regards to sanctions is quite heightened and quite tense. That's my perception being here in New York between the different parties. Some of them trying to show that North Korea has taken right steps towards denuclearization, and therefore that has to be pondered and considered by the Sanctions Committee. And some others arguing that there have been no substantial steps towards denuclearization, and therefore the sanctions regime must remain in place for the time being. This is the kind of discussions taking place. It's not of my mandate to give an opinion about it. What I do believe is that humanitarian aid, based on the humanitarian principles, should be guaranteed in North Korea, and the UN agencies should be able to carry out their own mandates, like OCHA, UNICEF, and others.
Final question. Thank you.
Could you speak more about what specific sanctions are presenting problems to humanitarian agencies? And I wanted to return to something you said earlier. If you can't pay, you will be turned away. What exactly did you mean by that? Are you talking about bribes or taxes?
On sanctions, I will leave it there. I haven't further explored at the moment the details of what the UN agencies are facing. I have the general statement from them about these limitations. If you reach out to these agencies, maybe you get more information. No, this was a woman that I interviewed I will not say where, but she was very clear. She was talking about bribes. When the system, for example, the public distribution system no longer exists in the provinces, when the health system is not providing health care for the people, what is becoming a pattern in North Korea, especially in the countryside. Again, this distinction is very important. The pattern that is becoming widespread in the countryside is the use of bribes to government officials in different areas. Of course, in the area of business, commercial, etc. The markets, etc. But also in the issues of social rights, economic social rights, like right to health. The system is not working, and the only way to get something is through paying bribes to the officials.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll close it there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.